Good evening, and welcome to the 14th Annual Esther C. Olin Lecture Recital Series on Piano Performance. Thank you for joining us this evening for Off the Beaten Path, Lesser-Known Works and Composers, featuring Music Department Chair Dr. Cynthia Ramsey and Dr. Johnson Scott, Professor Noemi Lee, and Professor Jeremy Kraft. We are so excited to hear this evening's offerings. Dr. Esther Clark Olin earned her Doctor of Musical Arts from Louisiana State University, Baton Rouge. She was a longtime adjunct professor of piano and music composition at Lynchburg College. She also taught music theory, piano class, accompanied senior voice recitals, and performed in string ensembles as a violist for numerous LC musical events. Dr. Olin accompanied her husband, Dr. Harvey Olin, in numerous community concert series, played viola in the New Orleans and Roanoke Symphony, and conducted the Loyola University Orchestra and Ballet Theater Ensemble. This lecture, named in her honor, is an annual tribute to her musical legacy here at the University of Lynchburg. We are thankful for this wonderful event and so thankful to see you here this evening. And now, tonight's performance.
Greetings and welcome. Can you believe it? It has been over 1 year since we have been in this space to have a recital and to listen to music. Amazing. So thank you guys so much for coming. As Dr. Dean said, this is the 14th annual Esther Olin Lecture, and I pushed the wrong button because Dr. Scott went away with the flicker, and he didn't flick. So we'll try this again. I think that's the right one now. So the title of this evening's lecture is Off the Beaten Path. And so it's a little bit different from before because we're not going to talk about one composer and we're not going to talk about one country, but we allowed each one of the participants in tonight's recital to select their own composer, someone that's not often performed, and someone that is not usually represented in standard literature. Just like the piece you just heard, which was written by a British composer, Edward Gregson, in 1945. Edward is a composer of movie music and film and theater. He does instrumental works and choral works, went to the Royal Academy of Music, and has a terrific compositional style, as you just heard. It's usually light and it's bouncy, and he changes keys by harmonically shifting from one to the next. This piece was dedicated to his sons. It was written in 1982. It was, you heard the third movement of a work that was called Four Pieces. He didn't give anything any titles. He wanted you just to sit and listen and not be influenced by any kind of extra ideas or extra thoughts. In addition, when I used that particular piece, It's a piano duet, so Dr. Scott and I should have been on the same bench, but we can't socially distance 6 feet and play the music, so obviously we had to get a different piano. But when I teach this to my students, it's usually one of their very first opportunities or one of the easier duet pieces to get started on. You could hear teacher play, student play, teacher play. You could hear that conversation and interaction without, and that's one of the excellent teaching pieces for this particular work. So tonight, we're going to talk to you about the pedagogical practices that we use with our students when teaching these works, and talk to you about how we would perform this on piano. You're going to hear about 6 different composers. Their names are on the screen here, and each one of the professors will share with you why they selected it and the importance of each composer, then share with you a piece and give you some information about it. So without any further ado, we're going to start with Dr. Scott.
William Schumann was an American educator and composer born in August of 2010 in New York, New York. He studied theory and composition at the Malkin Conservatory in New York and earned his Bachelor of Science and Master of Arts at the Teachers College at Columbia University. And we have had students leave University of Lynchburg and go to that school to pursue their degrees as well. He taught fine arts at Sarah Lawrence College in Bronxville, New York, and was friends with Aaron Copland, who introduced him to Sergei Kalsavitsky, who was the conductor at the time of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and he performed Schumann's Symphony No. 2 in February of 1939 and was quite a proponent of his music. He premiered many of his works. So interestingly enough, William Schumann was influenced by John Dewey's educational philosophy, and so was incredibly interested in education and became the president of the Institute of Musical Art and the Juilliard Graduate School as well. He merged the two at a later time to create the Juilliard School of Music. He also served as a special consultant at G. Schirmer, a famous music publisher. He served as president of Lincoln Center and negotiated the New York City Opera and New York City Ballet combination with Lincoln Center. So he brought those two there together and then ultimately created a path for the Juilliard School of Music to Lincoln Center in 1969. Quite a busy man. In the process of that, he had an opportunity to compose, as his degree was theory and composition. The piece that I'll be playing for you tonight is called, it's the second movement, and just like Dr. Ramsey's piece, it doesn't really have a name. It's not considered program music, but absolute music. 3-score set, written in 1943. This piece is a fantastic opportunity to look at 7 different areas of pedagogy in its short one-page form. It is bitonal, or it experiences polytonality, written in a polytonal form, meaning 2 tones at the same time. Actually, this one does not have a key per se, and so what I mean by polytonality in this case is chords of different tonality with each chord that you hear. They are all major, except for the few that are 1 and 2 tones at a time. They're extreme dynamic contrasts, so the student has an opportunity to go from fortissimo to mezzo piano and then down to piano all within the same page. Each chord, or almost each chord, is a 3-voice chord in both the left and right hand at the same time. Now, if you are moving from one chord to the next and no notes stay the same and you do your counting right, you'll notice that 3 notes moving to 3 notes needs 6 fingers to be legato. And so not going to happen for most of us. And so this is a great opportunity also to learn pedaling and how to keep those slurs smooth between chords. There are, in case you haven't noticed on the screen, a number of accidentals. And so keeping one's eye on the score or memorizing is even better, are certainly important. Another pedagogical opportunity is a contrary motion. You'll notice that when the line descends in the right hand, it ascends in the left hand and vice versa. And then to add to all of this, the tempo is written at the half note is equal to 40 beats per minute. So it is very slow, and learning to keep the tempo at that slow pace without rushing is also a challenge. So there are the 7 opportunities in one simple little page for anyone learning this piece. And without further ado, let's hear it.
Good afternoon. My name is Professor Jeremy Kraft. I'm the Director of Choral Activities here at the University of Lynchburg. This evening I'm going to be talking about and playing some of the movements of 4 seasonal sketches by Betty Jackson King. And as I considered our theme this year, one of the things that I immediately thought of was what are some underrepresented groups in our traditional, or what we think of as our traditional repertoire. And so the groups that I immediately went to were Black female composers. In our understanding or our traditions within Western classical music, this is certainly probably one of the most underrepresented groups of composers that we could imagine. And so I wanted to bring light to one, specifically Miss Betty Jackson King. She was born in 1928. Some things say she was born in Chicago. Some things say that she moved there to 2 musical parents. She was very strong in her faith, and her father's influence helped to influence that musical influence for her. And we can see that within her 3 operas, all of which were sacred in nature, and all of them her father was the librettist for. She was an educator both in public schools and in the university setting. She was the president of the National Association of Negro Musicians for several years, and she's very well known for her arrangements of spirituals. So the 4 seasonal sketches are just wonderful pieces. I found the Spring Intermezzo, which I'll be playing tonight, in a book, a compilation, an anthology of works by Black female composers. And what I noticed as I was playing all of the movements was that she has a lot of repeated ideas. So those repeated ideas tend to influence the contrast because we have a lot of repetition, and then all of a sudden she just completely shifts gears. She has a lot of very large chords within all of the movements, and I've already spoken to the repetition. So some of the pedagogical considerations that we have to make, some of the chords within the movements are well beyond an octave and a third. And so when I would work with a student on something like this, we would have to be very creative in how we chose the fingers that we use to hit those chords. In several opportunities throughout the various movements, I would have to use my thumb to essentially hit 2 and sometimes 3 different keys at the same time, just so my pinky can still reach the top note of the chord. And the other pedagogical consideration I think I would add to this is that I think she trips up the performer by making them anticipate what's getting ready to happen in the music and then just shifting it right at the last minute. And I think you'll hear that tonight as I play these. So this evening I will be playing the first and second movements, the spring intermezzo and the summer interlude. So I hope you enjoy.
Greetings and good evening. My name is Dr. Cynthia Ramsey. I'm chair of the music department. And before I get into my two short pieces, I wanted to share with you a century of inventions. Yeah, it's a crazy cover for a piano book, right? It's got the outer space on it. But I highly recommend this book. It's got 34 different pieces in it, and it ranges in difficulty from intermediate, what Maurice Henson, the person that compiled this, calls somebody that's taken piano lessons about 4 or 5 years, up to moderately difficult works that would be performed by college music majors. There are 26 different composers from 14 different countries. And so I've listed out some of the composers, and I've listed out several of the countries. The author of the text puts the bibliography or the biographies of the composers in the back, and they put information about each piece in the front. So I didn't have to go very far to research the information about this. I just used the notes from this because I thought that they were quite good. So a century of inventions. And so I want to bring attention to two particular pieces of work and two composers. So for those of you that are in music history, and we come to class tomorrow, I hit the wrong button. I really need to stop that. Oh, I am so challenged. I try though. There. Okay, so tomorrow we're going to talk about Arnold Schoenberg. When we did a study abroad to Vienna, I had the opportunity to view that house on the left in a little town outside of Vienna called Mudlin. If you can look at the fence, it's blue in the picture, but you can see a picture of Arnold Schoenberg on the right-hand side standing in front of that same fence that is still standing today, which is amazing to me in and of itself that it has lasted that long. But Arnold Schoenberg, pick up the clicker and push. Step away. Okay, so Arnold Schoenberg is a pivotal composer in the history of 20th century music. He is Austrian. He is the founder of the Second Viennese School, and he is important to music history for his development of the atonal system, for the artistic movement, expressionism, and serialism, or what we know to be 12-tone row. This particular composition is the Opus 19, and I'm going to play the second movement from that. It was written in 1911 during his atonal period. It comes from the collection called 6 Short Piano Pieces. That's the entire work. Speaking of concise and omit needless notes, right? So not very many notes there at all. You're going to notice that the melody line is extremely disjunct, which is one of the characteristics of expressionism, and it gives you an opportunity to talk about different types of texture and how he organized the music. Now, I have had a student that wanted to work on this piece, and so when I was working with her, one of the very first things that we had to investigate was the vocabulary, because it is in German, and so unless you're fluent in German, you are going to have to use that nice little translator in order to figure out what did the composer really want to do. The left hand is to be performed dry, very short. Henson described it as it needs to sound like a drippy, leaky faucet. And you need to bring out the melody in the right hand. Those German words mean things like retard or to slow down, or use more pedal, or use tenuto. And I love that the author calls this a tiny masterpiece. You can decide that for yourself when you hear it. The second piece is by German composer Ernst Pepping. And in Germany, he is a highly respected composer. He taught in Berlin and had extensive training in counterpoint and in organ and in religious choral works. This particular piece was a dance written in 1939 from a collection that was entitled Rounds and Dances. And when I've taught this, some of the things that you really have to be aware of are the difference between a non-legato left hand and a very melodic right hand simultaneously. the author talks about paying attention to the accents in measures 2 and measures 5 and measure 7. So the composer really wanted to highlight that idea. There's a lot of fluctuation in tempo. It gives you an opportunity to work with dynamics and accents and use of pedal. And for my form and analysis friends, this is binary form. 7 measures for the first phrase and 8 measures for the second with a very short coda. So here is Kleines Klavierstück by Arnold Schoenberg and Poco Lento by Ernst Pepping.
Good evening. So good to see you. I'm smiling. You cannot see me smiling, but you are the audience after a year that we haven't had an audience, so thank you. And those of you who are following on live stream also, thank you for tuning in. Did you listen to enough strange music tonight? You probably have, and there's some more on the way. But this is very close to my heart, both of these people. And so let's see, who are we talking about tonight? We are talking about Kodály Zoltán and George Enescu. You might wonder, why did I say Kodály Zoltán instead of Zoltán Kodály? Because in Hungarian, which is also my nationality and also Kodály's nationality, we say the family name first and then your other name. So anyhow, Zoltán Kodály and George Enescu. So let's start with Kodály. Kodály is a Hungarian composer, was born in 1882 and died only in 1967, so some of you might have been still alive when he passed away. He was a composer, ethnomusicologist, pedagogue, linguist, and philosopher. And you probably have heard of his name that is attached to the Kodai method of music education. If you have, please raise your hand. Very good. Okay, so some of you might be students that hopefully heard about that. So he played the violin as a child, but his passion was to visit remote villages to collect songs, recording them on phonograph cylinders. So he really embraced the folk element in the Hungarian music, and that's where he went. He went and collected these folk songs. So people in villages, of course, they didn't write down these songs, and so Kodai would show up with a recorder, and he listened and he recorded this music. Some of it will show up in his music as well. So he combines the classical forms of music with these Hungarian folk elements. And we have to also mention that he didn't only go to Hungary, he was also doing research in Transylvania and also in the Hungarian sections of Slovakia, and I am from Transylvania. So he came to my part of the world, and also he collected his folk songs from there too. Now, Kodai had no public success until 1923, part of it due to his shy nature. And in 1966, only 1 year before his death, he toured the United States and gave a special lecture at Stanford University. He was, at that point, 83 years old. That's a pretty nice accomplishment, I think. So let's talk a little bit about the Kodai method. I'm not going to ask you to tell me about it, but I will say a few words. So teaching methods. And he loved children. He wanted music to become part of their lives, and I know that you as future music educators are fighting for that. To give you an example, my son is today 7 years old. If he's listening, boldog születésnapot, that was in Hungarian, happy birthday for him. Anyhow, so this year, the virtual students at Lynchburg City Schools only have one music assignment every 2 weeks. And so I don't think Kodai would have been very happy about that. So he embarked on a long-term project to reform music teaching in Hungary's lower and middle schools. And he developed this method in 1940s. And I don't bore you with the details of that, but it was a very successful method. His legacy is important. He was also very good friends with Bartók, and both Bartók Béla, you definitely heard of him. We don't mention him tonight because he's more known. And but one interesting detail that I didn't know until I started researching a little bit on him is that, did you know that he almost became president of Hungary? I don't think you knew that. In 1956, there was a revolution against the Soviet occupation. And Kodai was so famous by that time that they thought that the newly formed revolutionary government wanted to elect him as president. Sadly, that government didn't last long, and so Kodai never became a president. The piece, a very short piece I will play for you, only 2 minutes. This is from 9 pieces, Opus 3. This is the 7th of the collection. It was written in 1909, and you might think, if you are a pianist yourself, if you want to learn a little bit of Kodai, this is not one of his big scale pieces or famous pieces. But it also, you will see that there's so many sudden changes. And you might find some elements of folk music. I do, because I grew up on some of this folk music. There are many sudden movements, shifts, dynamics, almost like somebody's throwing a temper tantrum. So see if you can follow that. And also the phrasing is asymmetric. So it's not something that you want to expect. Of course, you probably heard of asymmetric phrasing, metrical changes tonight in other composers' works as well. And it's good to have larger hands, because you're going to have to play lots of clusters, harmonic clusters, which means that random notes together, but they're on a large scale. So have fun with it. It's really a good composer to learn. The second piece I will present tonight is by George Enescu, and he is a Romanian composer. Some of you who have known me for years always wonder, what are you? Are you Romanian or are you Hungarian? And it's very confusing. So I'm a Hungarian from Romania. Therefore, I present a Hungarian and a Romanian. and I want to honor tonight the friendship that exists between these two nations, because unfortunately, politically, it doesn't. And all my life in Romania was marked by ethnic tensions between these two nations. So tonight, we want to be friends, we want to bring peace. George Enescu, contemporary to Kodály as well, 1881 to 1955. And he was one of the greatest musicians in Romanian history. So if you've heard of Kodály, have you heard of Enescu before? Anybody? Some of the music faculty members. Enescu, unfortunately, is not well known here in this country, more so in Europe. Composer, violinist, pianist, conductor, and teacher as well. He was an 8th child of his parents, born after all the previous siblings died in infancy. So what a wonderful treat for the parents to have him not only alive, but also prospering, and such a tremendous talent. He was a child prodigy. At 5.5 years old, he composed his first very good piece. And shortly after that, in 1888, at the age of 7, he became the youngest student ever admitted to the Vienna Conservatory at 7. Can you imagine teaching a 7-year-old? And he, of course, a 10-year-old, then he gave a private concert at the court of Vienna in the presence of Emperor Franz Joseph. So you will see actually similarities between him and Mozart a little bit. He also met his idol Johannes Brahms. It must have been a very interesting and enthusiastic meeting. He graduated at the age of 12, so 5 years, and he graduated. And he went to Paris to continue his studies at 12. Age of 12, and he studied violin. He was primarily a violinist, and composition with Jules Massenet and Gabriel Fauré. Now, once you hear his music, you start recognizing the impressionistic elements in his music as well. And he studied at the Conservatoire de Paris as well. And Enescu's works are, just like Kodály's works were influenced by the Hungarian folk elements, Enescu's music is influenced by the Romanian folk elements as well. His famous pieces are the 2 Romanian rhapsodies, an opera, and the suites for orchestra. He also developed a deep interest in Oriental music. So he rehearsed with Ravi Shankar's brother. And so he I don't recall elements of that definitely in the piece that I will play tonight. We cannot find that, but he was influenced by that as well. You've all heard of Yehudi Menuhin. and Enescu was his teacher, his main master teacher. So Enescu really helped him become the violinist that we know him to become. He also came to America in 1923, and as a conductor in a concert given by the Philadelphia Orchestra at Carnegie Hall in New York City, and then he visited the United States many times. In 1936, he also appeared as a conductor with many orchestras and was one of the candidates considered to replace Arturo Toscanini as permanent conductor of the New York Philharmonic. I did not know that till I read about it, so quite an honor. He lived in Paris and in Romania, but after World War II and the Soviet occupation of Romania, he remained in Paris. He promoted contemporary Romanian music as well. Now, the reception of his music is quite spectacular. Pablo Casals, famous cellist, describes Enescu as the greatest musical phenomenon since Mozart. So I think maybe we ought to start playing more Enescu, perhaps. Yehudi Menuhin, Enescu's most famous pupil, once said about his teacher, "He will remain for me the absoluteness through which I judge others." And Enescu gave me the light that has guided my entire existence. Vincent d'Indy claimed that if Beethoven's works were destroyed, they could be all reconstructed from memory by George Enescu. Don't you envy that? That talent that somebody can have to play pieces by heart like that. Alfred Cortot, a pianist, of one of the greatest pianists, he says, "Through primarily a violinist, Enescu had a better piano technique than his own." Tonight's piece selection is from the Piano Suite Number 2 in D major, Opus 10, also subtitles Des Cloches Sonores, the harmonious bells. And you will find elements of that in the music. That's the second suite that he composed. He composed this suite between 1901 and 1903, so just a few years before Kodai composed the piece that I will play first. But you will see the difference in the style, definitely. The Pavan. Pavan, you hear this name, this music, this title, this genre appearing in many other, composers' lives, creations. Fauré, for example, or Ravel. They were all creating during the same time, similar times. Pavan is a slow processional dance that was common in Europe during the Renaissance. And the pavan comes from the peacock in English. So I guess you had to look like a peacock and move around like a peacock when you would be dancing this dance. And you will maybe see some of that in the music as well, but it's very removed from that original destination, the way that Enescu presented it. And how to play this as a pianist? I think that's a sort of a call to make, by each individual, because he doesn't, tempo-wise, he doesn't give many indications. And so I chose to interpret this piece very freely and more in the maybe Debussy-esque style. It's worth mentioning that this piece won the Pleyel Prize, and Claude Debussy, Vincent d'Indy were among the judges. The whole suite did, not just the pavan, but the whole suite. And so definitely has that influence. But also, one of the interesting Romanian elements, folk elements, have to do with a lone flute, shepherd's flute, with the shepherds being around. And one can imagine that this shepherd would play the flute, and so that's what you hear in the right-hand melody. To me, that's what I hear, and maybe you will also pick up on that. Just be, as a pianist, just be very flexible with this, and timing-wise, dynamic-wise, and it's a really beautiful piece. So I hope you enjoy both of the selections.
And that's going to conclude our lecture. So in conclusion, there's obviously a wide array of music for amateurs and professionals that are written by lesser-known composers. These composers that you heard tonight have redefined, have pioneered, have developed, have provided stark selections, contrast. It was interesting. Each one of us picked a 20th century group of composers, and that was by accident, mere accident. And obviously an incredible enrichment of piano repertoire and the unique link between composer and performer. I got into Ancestry.com, and so I know where my relatives have come from, and so the German connection really spoke to me. And Noemi talked to you about her connection, and Jeremy wanting to bring forward the African American female. So each one of us have brought something and have a unique link between the composer and the performer. And so what's up for next year? It'll be number 15. And so we thought that we would pay a tribute to Esther Olin in and of herself. So her favorite composer is Maurice Ravel. So we will either do Maurice Ravel for her, or she is a composer in her own right, and we may do a recital of all of her compositions and pay tribute to her in that manner. But it'll be about the same time next year for number 15, and so we thank you guys very much. It's 8:30, and we got you in and out and at the hour mark. Thanks, and have a good evening.